Good morning. So this is your first math lesson video, and what you are going to need for sure is pencil and paper. If you have a whiteboard at home, that would be great because you can do the review part steps with us. And you will need your math worksheet. And we are skipping several lessons because our next lessons are things that would have to be me working with you in the classroom. So we are actually skipping ahead to lesson, I've got to find it, 136. So if you have your worksheet, tear out page 245 and 246, because we're going to jump ahead to order of operations and do it that way. I know the lighting isn't the best, but when I had all the lights on, there was a big glare on the board, and I want you to be able to see. So if you want to pause this, if you have a whiteboard and you want to go grab it, or if you need to get pen and paper or tear out the correct sheet, now's a good time, and then we'll get started. All right, we're going to do a little bit of review because some of these things you're going to see in the review sections of your worksheets. So I just wanted to start off with seeing if you remember these. If you don't, you might want to write these down on a piece of paper where you have notes if you don't already, so you can keep them, especially if you've lost those pages in the back of your book. So just reviewing some of the formulas that we have gone over before. So if you remember what perimeter of a square is, you should have started with P equals, and then hopefully you said side times 4, or 4 times side. Okay. You could also add all 4 sides, side plus side plus side plus side, but you will need to remember this. We're going to skip ahead to area of a square would be different than perimeter. Hopefully you remembered A equals, and it's side times side. So perimeter, the distance around, 4 times the side. Area, the side times itself, is going to give us the area, of course, in square units. Okay. How about the perimeter of a rectangle? We work with this a lot. It's one of the longer formulas, even though it's easier. Hopefully you remembered. Perimeter equals double the length plus double the width. Okay. That's for the perimeter, the distance around. How about the area formula for a rectangle? A equals length times width. That one's pretty easy. Also, the area for a parallelogram, we learned that one was pretty easy. You should remember A equals base times height. And anytime you need to pause the video to write these down, that would be a good idea so that you have them. Hopefully, though, you already have these memorized and don't need to write them down again. How about the area of a triangle? There was one step that we usually missed. It was very similar to area of a parallelogram. Hopefully you remembered it's area equals half the base times the height. And remember we talked about you could cut the base in half, or you could cut the height in half and then multiply, or you could multiply these two and then cut it in half, but you only cut it in half one time. It's been a little while since we've done the circumference of a circle. Remember, with circles, we don't use perimeter. We use circumference. Remember, we use the diameter, pi times diameter. Or you could double the radius and multiply by pi because the diameter is double the radius. But the easy formula to remember is pi times diameter. And then the last one we're going to review, area of a circle. Remember, it was unusual because you can't have perfectly square units in a circle, but we still learned that they have a formula. Pi times the radius squared, not the radius doubled. That would be pi times diameter for circumference, but the radius times itself. Okay. So if you remember, because we're going to be using exponents today. Exponents, it doesn't mean we multiply the base times this. That is not what it is equal to. What it is it tells us how many times we're multiplying the base. So if we have 3 squared, 3 times 3, the answer would be 9. 4 cubed, or 4 to the third power, means we're multiplying that 4 3 times. So 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. So very quickly, what would then be 2 to the 5th power? It would have to be 2 multiplied out 5 times. All right, hopefully you said 32, because 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32. It's not 2 times 5 is 10, so please be careful when we're working with exponents, because we are going to be working with them again today, and I just wanted to make sure we had reviewed that so we knew what we were doing. At this point, if you want to follow along in your math worksheet, we're going to go through the yellow box example, and we'll go through some of the first problems together as well to make sure you're getting the hang of it before I go ahead and end the lesson and let you get to work. So in order of operations, there's a specific order, because in a lot of these types of problems, people could do them straight across, they could do them in different orders, and you need to make sure in math that you always have one exact answer. So they came up with order of operations. Now your book explains the step-by-step, step 1, 2, 3, and 4, but what I've always used, rather than step 1, 2, 3, and 4, is this acronym, which is called PEMDAS, or I like to make up a weird sentence for it, so it's purple eggplants make disgusting afternoon snacks. If you can remember those things, that might be a little easier than just step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. But if you'll notice, as we go through them, these are going to match right along with it. So number 1, you'll notice it says simplify within parentheses first. Okay, so the P in PEMDAS doesn't just stand for purple eggplants, right? It stands for parentheses. Now they could look like this, that's usually what we'll see, but as you'll notice, even with problems we may get into this year and further into next year, these type of brackets work the same way as parentheses. So you do the parentheses first. What I always like to do is underline those parts so I know what I'm focusing on, especially when I have a long problem like this. If you look to the right, we have 6 plus parentheses 3 minus 2 times 2 squared minus 5 divided by 5. Well, my first step is going to be parentheses. So I know this is the part I've got to focus on and solve. Of course, we know very easily 3 minus 2 is 1. I'm going to rewrite the problem, substituting that 1 with what I solved. The reason why it's a good idea to get into habit of rewriting every time, when you get into pre-algebra and algebra 1, you're going to have very complex equations with multiple steps, and it's easy just to break it down into smaller and smaller pieces, one at a time, so you can see each time what is the next step. You try to do it in your head, it's going to get out of order and it's very easy to lose track. So setting up good habits now in 6th grade is going to help you as we get into the more advanced math with pre-algebra and algebra 1. Plus, I'll have you train for Mr. Weiss. He will make you do this. Okay, step 2 in your book says simplify powers. Remember, powers was another word for exponents. So it's not just purple eggplants, it's parentheses, exponents. And I have a little 2 here to help you remember. You might want to write this down to use as we go through the next several days doing order of operations. If I look at my problem here, I notice I have exponents right there. So I'm going to solve that. Again, rewriting, I still have a 6 plus a 1 times, now I solve, 2 squared. Well, it's 2 times itself twice. We just reviewed exponents. 2 times 2 is 4, and then we still have minus 5 and divided by 5. So the underlined part I solve, everything else in the problem gets rewritten in. So again, I can see exactly what I'm looking at each step. Step 3 on your paper says multiply and divide left to right. These two can switch around. Once we get to the multiplying and dividing step, We could multiply before we divide. We could divide before we multiply, as long as we're going straight across like we would in reading. So what I do is I look for any and all multiplication and division problems. I have a 1 times 4 and I have a 5 divided by 5. We are not going straight across 6 plus 3 minus 2 times 2 squared minus 5 divided by 5. Order of operations doesn't work that way. We will get the incorrect answer. So going back to step 3, multiplying and dividing, because this comes first as I go across, I solve that first. 1 times 4 I know is 4. 5 divided by 5 I know is 1. I still have a minus sign in between, and then I still have the 6 and the plus sign here. Now we're done to the last step, or we're down to the last step, I should say. If you'll notice step 4, add and subtract from left to right. So both of these, it doesn't matter if subtraction comes first or addition comes first, we always go left to right. So in this case, when we're down to addition and subtraction, we can just go straight across. 6 plus 4, which is 10, minus 1, which is 9, and that's how we get that answer. Whereas if we had tried to go straight across, starting from the 6, adding the 3, subtracting the 2, plus the 2, multiply by itself, we could end up with, for example, 6 plus 3 is 9, minus 2 is 7, times 2 is 14, 14 squared. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. We're already way off base from the end result, which is the correct answer, 9. And if you look at your example on the right of your yellow box, you'll notice that they came up with 9. Now we're going to ignore the other examples at the bottom. I think they have it set up confusing, but we're going to do some other examples over here that are a little shorter. Again, this just takes some practice. The more you work through it and use it, the more comfortable you'll be with it, and the easier it will be to do that as well. So again, we look always for P, parentheses first, PEMDAS. Do I have parentheses in these problems? I absolutely do. So for this one, that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to solve it and rewrite my problem. So now I'm left with 6 times, we've got 3 plus 4, which is 7. There is no other operation left. There are no exponents. My next step would be multiplication. There's no addition or subtraction. Once I'm down to something like this, it's very simple to end it there, 42. We won't have long problems like this as often. More frequently in 6th grade, we'll have ones that are this size, but it's important to understand how rewriting things and putting each step as we go along is really going to help you in the long run. Same thing with the next problem. Always look for parentheses first. That's an easy thing to look for. It's kind of like big signs waving like, hey, check me out, do me first. All right, so this is that person that's always wanting to go first in line or first through. You know who you are. I can't say your name on video. Okay, so they get to go first. We rewrite. Now we have 15 divided by, let's solve. 2 plus 3 we know is 5. And then we have a times 8. Exponents, there aren't any, so we can move on to the next step. Multiplication and division. Now here's where it's important to remember. I said once we have multiplication and division, it's all connected. We don't have to multiply before we divide. Just because it's in this order in the list, they're together. They could go in either order because they're the same step. So because that's what we're left with, 15 divided by 5 is going to be 3. 3 times 8 we know is 24. So this is all one step from left to right. We don't multiply before doing the division if that division comes first. Okay? It will always come before any addition and subtraction, but these two are a pair deal. Last problem we have here, again starting from the beginning with our steps, PEMDAS. There are no parentheses in our final problem. So we move to the next step, exponents. We do have an exponent problem, so we need to solve that first. 3 squared. I am praying that you remembered the review we just had a couple minutes ago and did not put 6. You should have had 9. Okay, 3 squared is 9. 54 divided by 9 is the only step left. There's nothing else left. So we're down to division, a very easy math fact that you should know. And if you had forgotten parentheses and put 6 here, your answer would end up being something completely wrong. So remember, not just the order, but how these work, because exponents can trick you out. So let's look at the ones that are on your worksheet. A, for number 1, you have 5 times 7 plus 2. Your first step, of course, would be 7 plus 2. You end up with 5 times 9, which the answer then would be 45. Okay. B is a little bit longer problem. So let's look at this one together, again, to make sure you're getting it before we move forward and I let you work independently. So we've got 12 divided by, and then we have some parentheses, 4 plus 2, close parentheses, and then times 3. What's your first step? Hopefully you already recognized and underlined that this is going to have to be the one you're going to take care of first. So when we rewrite it, 12 divided by, here's a 6, and then times, and then 3. Going in PEMDAS, what would be next? There's no exponents, so you're right if you said multiplying and dividing. However, what am I going to do first? Am I going to do 12 divided by 6, or am I going to do 6 times 3? Hopefully you remembered, because it's only multiplication and division, we go from left to right. If it helps you to solve this first, 12 divided by 6, and then do 2 times 3, because that's all you have left, that's fine. Or it's easy enough to recognize all I've got left is multiplication and division. They're a package deal. I go straight across. 12 divided by 6 is 2 times 3 is 6. Okay. How about C? We have 16 divided by 2 squared. You can pause it and solve it. Then we're going to go over the answer. Hopefully you've done it correctly. Okay. All right, so if you paused it on your own and then solved it, hopefully you remembered this is the first thing that we're going to do because there are no parentheses and exponents is the next thing on the list. 2 squared is 4, so what we're left with is 16 divided by 4, and you already know this fact. Now it's important for me to let you know I need to see these steps worked out in this way because that shows your work. That shows that you've done that thought process, and it proves to me when you send me a picture of your work, your worksheets, the fronts and the backs, when I get them, I can see exactly what steps you were doing and that you do understand how to complete and solve these answers. If you don't show work, you're not going to get that full A for participation. So D, solve it quickly and then I'll give you the answer. You can pause. All right, if you've unpaused, the answer should be 30. Your first step was to multiply. You had a 3 times 2 and you had a 6 times 4. Then you can add those two products together. So it would have been 6 plus 24, and that would get you 30. I'm going to give you a chance to pause here, and then I'm going to go over the answers E through H. Then I'm going to show you how to do section 2 after that. Right, so hopefully you did E through H. So let's just real quick check your answers. E, you should have gotten 26. Right? You had to do the parentheses, then you had to multiply. Your last step was adding. F, you should have gotten 2. You just had to multiply and divide straight across. So 5 times 6 is 30, 30 divided by 3, 10 divided by 5. The answer to G is 19. You had to multiply before you added. And then H, the answer is 7 because you had to divide before you subtracted. Again, if you can remember PEMDAS or purple eggplants make delicious afternoon snacks or whatever crazy sentence you want to use and make up to help you remember the order, that can help you set up for order of operations correctly. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is section 2. I'm just going to show you the first one because fractions with exponents work the same way as whole numbers. Okay, so if we have, for example, A, 2/3, and it's in parentheses to the second power. We've done this before, but it's been a long time. It means the whole fraction times itself twice. So that would be 2/3 times 2/3. We've done it times itself, and we've got it twice, just like this exponent tells us. And then we multiply as usual. There's no cross-canceling we can do here. So we get 4/9. There's no more parentheses, no more exponents. It's simply 4/9. So go ahead and do B through E. Pause the video while you work those out, and then I'm going to go over the answers to make sure you've gotten those parts correctly. All right, so hopefully you're finished. We've got B, the answer is 1/4, because you've got 1 times 1 and 2 times 2. C is 9/16. D, 25/49. And then E, 1/16. You are not going to be doing number 3 because we skipped several lessons. We'll come back to those if we ever come back to school together. And so number 3, go ahead and cross out. You don't need to do it at all. I don't even want you to try because we have not been taught that. Number 4, you're completing the chart. We went over the formulas earlier in the video. Here's where you're going to use them. They give you a radius. You have to find circumference of the circle and area of the circle. And if you remember, if I can find them here, their formulas are a little different. This is where you're going to have to use them. Circumference is in regular units. Area is always in square units, and you can remember that because the square is even in that formula. So for number 4, complete both of them. 7 inches radius and a 12 centimeter radius. Find the circumference and then find the area. On the back page, you're going to do all of those problems. We're not going to worry about any homework lessons at all from the back of the book during this distance learning. But I did want to go over a couple things in reminding you so that you can complete the back portion properly. When we have the converting measures section, several of you are still forgetting how we convert when we have something instead of 1 mile and you want to put 5,280 feet. What happens when it's 1/4 of a mile? Now remember, we're going from miles to feet. So larger to smaller, we're going to multiply. That's your first step. What are we going to multiply by? Well, again, we know that 1 mile is 5,280 feet, so we set it up to multiply that way. So 1/4 times, step 1, that 5,280. And of course, I can cross cancel here, just like I would anytime I multiply with a fraction. So I'm left with 1 times 1,320 over 1 times 1. And we know how to simplify that. So 1/4 of a mile is 1,320 feet. So when you're converting, remember, larger unit to smaller unit, you multiply. Smaller unit to larger unit, divide. Don't forget which operation. The other thing I want to make sure you remember is finding percentage, because you'll see this on here. We've done this a lot, but we've also done a lot of other facts, and I want to make sure that you're remembering how to set these up. So if we're finding 18% of $120, remember that 18% becomes a decimal. Of, whenever we see of, we're always going to multiply. That's why they're both in blue. So we set it up 120 times 0.18, because we've converted it to a decimal by moving that decimal 2 places. We multiply and solve. Make sure that decimal point comes in the answer. However many are in the problem, that's how many decimal places need to be in the answer. We've got 2 decimal places, 2 decimal places. Of course, because we're using money, we put that in our answer. So 18% of $120 would be $21.60. So for those of you who needed that reminder, there it is, because you're going to use it quite a bit today. I know that's not the same as having you in person. I really would enjoy people actually answering questions instead of talking to myself, but that's the lesson. So your assignment is to complete pages 245 and 246 only. You're going to do every problem except for number 3 today, and I will see you again tomorrow for your next math lesson. Miss you guys, hope you're having a good day, and don't work too hard, but work hard enough.